Welcome to the PharmaVOICE Webcast Network.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dan Limbach, producer of the PharmaVOICE Webcast Network. Welcome to our kickoff of the DIA Virtual Annual Meeting. Our event today is entitled the PharmaVOICE 2020 Interactive Super Panel, A Changing Clinical Landscape. The Future is Now. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to acquaint you with a few features of our technology. Your Zoom interface will give you access to several functions. If you are dialing in by phone but are experiencing problems logging in to see the visuals, you may want to try logging in using a different browser. We recommend the latest versions of Chrome, Firefox, Edge, and IE. Tablets and smartphones also work if you have the free Zoom mobile app and a current OS. You can also use the chat feature to contact us with your technical questions, and we'll do our best to help you out. Or you can visit support.zoom.us. We're taking questions from the audience today, and you can contribute to the Q&A session by asking questions at any time during the discussion. Just type your question into the questions text area in your Zoom interface and click the send button. You will be an active participant in today's event. We'll have audience polls throughout the discussion, so get ready to have your voice heard. You're going to be seeing and hearing a great deal of useful information today, and you don't have to memorize everything during this live event or take copious notes. We are recording this event, and we will send you a link to the on-demand archive in about 24 hours, so you can review the event again at your leisure. The on-demand recording will also be available on the PharmaVOICE Resource Library microsite, created specifically for this year's DIA Virtual Annual Meeting, and that location is pharmavoice-resource-library.com. You can also get there from the pharmavoice.com website. We have 20 streaming thought leaders on webcams today, so please keep your Zoom window set to gallery view so you can see everyone on a single screen. The view function is at the top right portion of the Zoom window. Now that we're through with the housekeeping details, let's dive into the program. Taryn Grome, editor of PharmaVOICE, will be our moderator today. Taryn, take it away.
Thanks, Dan, and very special thanks to our super panelists, executives whose expertise and companies span the clinical ecosystem. Why a super panel? What better way to kick off this year's annual DIA meeting, which is virtual, than with some of the top thought leaders in the industry. They are joining us from across the country as well as the UK. If you'd like to learn more about these amazing thought leaders, their bios can be found on pharmavoice.com on the webinar tab. Thank you as well to all of you joining us online from around the world for the next 2 hours. During this interactive super panel, we'll be asking 20 questions, as Dan said, covering 4 important topics: COVID-19, technology, innovation business models, and patients. To keep things interesting and engaging, we are mixing a little old school with a little new school. Our audience and panel will be answering the same set of questions. For the audience, Dan will launch a poll for each question. These same questions will have been answered in advance by our super panelists. And after each poll closes, our panelists will be asked to hold up their answer to the question. This is where the old school comes in. We look forward to seeing how the answers shake out, where there's alignment, and where there are differing opinions. For each question, a couple of our panelists will provide their insights on the topic. We hope this format provides for a lively discussion. Speaking of which, at the end of the 20 questions, we will open up the program to allow panelists to interact with one another and you. We will be tracking your questions during the program, and we will do our best to get as many of them as time allows. I just want to make a note that Patrick Lindsay from UBC is on, but we hope to get his video up going before the end of the 2 hours. So Dan, let's get started with question number 1.
All right, let's do it. So I'm launching the first poll, and what we'd like to know is, in your view, how much has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted clinical operations across all aspects of the industry? So pick one of the 4 possible answers: 0 to 25, 26 to 50, 51 to 75, or 76 to 100. We got a lot of activity coming in already. We're just going to give everyone a moment to get their answers in.
Dan,
Still coming in? Okay, let's say last call. I'm going to close the poll, and let's share the results. So Taryn, it looks like the 51 to 75 and the 76 to 100 are dominating this poll. So they're all on the upper end of the scale. Let's continue.
Yeah, I would say now panelists display your cards. How did you vote? Yep. I would say there's a lot of alignment between our panelists as well as the audience. 15% of you on the panel believe there's been little to no impact, where 25 of you about say there's been some impact, and 18 say there's been quite a bit of impact, and 42% there's been significant impact. So Craig Sarah, and I have to call him Craig Sarah because we have two Craigs, you answered that you have seen impact in the 76 to 100% range. Please tell us about your experience. And then when Craig is finished, Sarvatsan, I'll ask you to jump in. Craig, on to you.
Thanks a lot, Taryn, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. I hope everyone's doing well and everyone's doing their part, big or small, to bring some empathy and kindness into the world, especially in light of the last few months. So on to the question. For me, I needed to define impact. I'm no Merriam or Webster, but I look at impact in this case as having to change plans because of a once-in-a-half-century event. With that definition, most DevOps activities have been impacted. We've seen mobilization of millions of people across pharma, tech, service providers, sites, patients. That is absolutely unprecedented for our industry. I don't know of one company that didn't immediately go to their portfolio, do a comprehensive analysis, and do everything they could to keep trials running, minimize any impact to patients, sites, timelines, data, and so on, all while keeping our patients safe. I saw a small percentage of decisions related to continuing exactly as things were, and a small percentage of decisions related to pausing or canceling activities. And those are for a very short period of time. I did see the vast majority of decisions, upwards of 90-some-odd%, being made to modify the way we actually just do things. And those modifications aren't new concepts. We're talking about digital recruitment, EHR analysis, remote monitoring, telemedicine, home nursing services, and so on. Things that we all probably are very familiar with, and we talked a lot for years and years, but all of a sudden the necessity was staring us right in the face. And so finally, I challenge all of us, no matter who you are, to transform your organization like never before. Not in 5 years, not in 10 years, but now. The clinical trial world is center stage. We're literally on television with people seeing the tip of the iceberg of a world that we've lived in for decades. We know that some of the things we're doing are not sustainable. 2-day database build, 3 days to develop and finalize a protocol. But importantly, we now know what is achievable. And so I beg you to take that to heart and let's make some magic happen together. Thank you.
Craig, awesome comments and excellent sentiment. Couldn't agree with you more. Sarvatsan, you responded almost in direct contrast, saying that, well, it was in direct contrast, that you've seen very little impact to clinical trials by COVID-19. Tell us why.
Yeah, no, thank you. What I meant by that, and I loved how Craig started on defining impact, because of course, all trials have been impacted. In our survey, we found that sites where no CRA visits, over 74% in US, and quite a large percentages of sites did not allow CRAs to visit. But what I meant by that is that despite that, the human ingenuity and agility and some of the digital work has made the impact be felt only by about 25%. That is what I meant by that truly everything has been impacted, but the way and the dimension of that impact is quite different and mitigated by different things which we did, what the regulatory agencies did in relaxing how we can go and approach things, to technologies which were available to support that remote interaction, with also the human ingenuity and the site's creativity to continue this model. As you know, clearly engaging and retaining patients, monitoring visit preparation, pre-screenings have all been affected. More importantly, we found that non-academic sites or freestanding sites were more impacted than large institutions because they were more prepared and ready for it. One of the key things we found is that what is the response to it? Why did I go with that 0 to 25? Because we did several things in enabling that agility to happen. Outside of the regulatory guidance, participants-based risk assessment, optimal use of central and remote monitoring, remote source data verification, documenting protocol deviations. And overall, we saw a lot of things which we were doing across the drug and the clinical trial process, which enabled us to do better. Last but not the least, the whole notion of decentralized trials, where we are now really going into a new norm of not just having site visit trials, but this hybrid trials between visiting and remote monitoring. So I think a lot has been done, and a lot of creativity and ingenuity has led us to continue the trials as they are. But I agree with Craig. Every one of the trial continuum has been impacted by this pandemic.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Craig and Srivatsan. Dan, let's move on to question number 2.
Absolutely. With an unprecedented surge of activity underway, there are more than 900 trials planned or underway for COVID-19 related medicines to discover and develop therapeutics and vaccines focused on the coronavirus. What we want to know is this a reasonable distribution of resources? Do you think, yes, it's a priority to find a solution, or no, it leaves too many other diseases underserved?
So we purposely wanted to draw a line in the sand with this question. So it's going to be interesting to see how the audience responds in comparison with our panelists.
Okay, we'll give everyone just another moment here. All right, let's say last call and share the results. It's a 60-40 split, so definitely not a landslide either way. 60% say yes, 40% say leaves too many other diseases underserved.
Okay, super panelists, show us your answers. Interesting. So a quarter of our panel says resources need to be more equitably distributed, while 3/4 are full in on finding a cure. So a little bit different from what our audience noted. Dr. Mark Wilgust and Alistair, you are coming at this question from 2 different perspectives. Alistair, why don't you kick off the discussion?
Sure. Thanks, Taryn. And thanks for having us on the panel. So from my perspective, you know, I'm very close with NIHR in the UK and discussing with them this week. You know, they've had requests for over 500 different requests to support trials just in the UK. And that's fantastic, right? It's great that there's that many trials out there. And obviously, I think we all agree that finding a solution to COVID-19 is a high priority. But to me, you know, from my kind of observation point and background, when there are 900 options to find a solution for one thing, that seems a little bit excessive. And I think this could be a time where pharma should be cooperating, working together on those solutions, those vaccines, those therapies, et cetera, that look like they have the biggest opportunity. Because with that number of trials out there and the speed by which COVID moves through, I think it's going to be very difficult to capture enough patients to successfully complete a lot of these trials. So either these trials need to be positioned where we know the virus is heading. You know, you can see at the moment India, Brazil, Latin America, or we're just not going to get the trials done. And that will probably be the worst outcome, that none of these trials come to a satisfactory conclusion to give us the information that we need to know moving forward. So for me, it's just a matter of prioritizing. In an avalanche, you know, it's a scramble. It's not, nobody gets to prioritize. And, you know, with an avalanche of trials heading towards sites that are already under high demand from just treating COVID, to me, it just seems like we could do this in a much smarter way.
Excellent point. Mark, why don't you jump in here?
Yeah, and look, I think Alistair and I probably have similar sentiments actually, but I think the majority of the people listening to the webinar today probably agree with me, which is, yes, we need to put in the right resources. I think it's really incumbent upon us to find treatments and vaccines, right? It's an unprecedented time in terms of a public health emergency. And in many ways, right, it's not really just about treating COVID-19. It's literally how COVID-19 has closed down society. If you kind of reflect for a second on what the United Nations said, right, it's a human, economic, and social crisis that's really attacking society today. And, you know, we also know that the virus is particularly detrimental to different segments of society that are particularly vulnerable, right, including people living in poverty, older individuals, people living with disabilities, and those types of things. So the ramifications of COVID-19 is far-reaching beyond the virus itself. And we really need to put the investments in place to really seek treatments and vaccines to help us get there. When you reflect on that number of 900 for a minute, right, it sounds like a lot, but actually if you look at it, there are actually 350,000 trials ongoing right now on clinicaltrials.gov, and 50,000 of those are actually ongoing. So when you think about 900, it's actually only about 1.8% of trials are actually COVID related. And then you kind of also think about the fact that we have 125 vaccines plus in development. By the time you do a couple of trials like that, you're at almost 400 trials. So 40% of these studies then suddenly could be vaccine trials, which is what we want. I think at the end of the day, right, we need to be judicious in the trials that we conduct. They need to be high quality, they need to be well designed, they need to be rigorous, right? So we need to follow the science. We need to have the right type of science. We need to be doing those double-blind, placebo-controlled studies, not single-arm studies. That's not the time for that. Clinical studies are essential for our goal to finding treatment and finding solutions. And we need to be disciplined in the conduct of those, focused on well-designed studies, because we have to follow the science, and those trials are going to help us innovate so that we can address the societal impact.
Excellent points from both of you. Thank you so much. Those are great insights into this really hot topic. Dan, let's move into question 3. So Dan, I think you're on mute.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not even following our instructions. So hopefully everyone's had a chance to read the question. How long do you think it will be before clinical operations begin to rev back up? Under 6 months, about 12 months, about 18 months, or over 24 months? And I think we've just about got everybody that's going to vote on this. We got some good responses here. So I'm going to say last call. End the poll. And under 6 months is the top vote getter, followed by 12 months. So they all think it's on the early side, Taryn.
Well, that's encouraging. So super panelists, show us your responses. This was a question where we wanted to really take a pulse of what's happening in the market. And we have an optimistic group here with the majority of the panel saying operations will rev back up in less than a year. Only one of our panelists think it will be about 18 months. And nobody thinks it'll take 2 years or more. So that's good news. John, you answered right in the middle at a 12-month point of recovery. Please tell us what you're seeing.
Thanks, Taryn. As I looked at this question, I really looked at when was the big influx of infection, and from that point, then I projected out what I thought might happen based on treatments availability and just getting control of the virus. But if we figure that the bulk of the activity really started to accelerate in March, to look at about a 12-month period, I think is pretty reasonable. And I think the real challenge here is, even though we're seeing right now, a lot of companies are starting to rev up operations, and we're seeing a lot more requests for proposals outside of just COVID trials. The real rate limiting step here is at the trial sites and the ability to bring patients into the studies. And we're doing a lot more remotely. We're doing a lot more with telemedicine. Those activities have really accelerated pretty dramatically. But I think when you look at getting back to what I would call a normal cadence of activity, I think it's not going to be, at least from my opinion, it's not going to be 6 months, optimistically 12. And I think it's also going to be dependent on whether or not we see a second outbreak. I think that's really the big question mark here. If there is a large second wave of COVID infections, then that will protract, I think, the recovery. But as of right now, here we are in June, we're starting to see an uptick in non-COVID type trials. And, if you think of what normal activity would look like, and I know a lot of my colleagues here, have seen this, some of the delays as well. I think, I would be realistic to say that by, March of next year, we should be back to what I would consider a normal cadence, assuming we don't have a major outbreak, a secondary outbreak. But I think that's the kind of ramp we're going to see. But again, the rate limiting step here is really around the sites and the patients. I think pharma's geared up, CROs are geared up, tech providers are geared up. It's just how quickly we can work in a virtual or even a hybrid model.
Excellent, John. Thank you so much. Those are great insights, especially on the second, if there is going to be a second phase. So Dan, on to question number 4. We're at a good clip here.
Yeah, we're rolling now. So we'd like to know, has the impact of COVID-19 increased the industry's tolerance for risk as related to clinical drug development? It's either yes, no, or you can take the middle road and say somewhat.
So one of the interesting things we've been hearing is that some of the companies are willing to take some leaps here in terms of moving forward, that sustainable opportunity to seize the moment, without of course putting patient safety at risk. So Dan, how's our audience doing?
They're doing good. I think we've got them. So I'm going to close it down and let's see what the results are. So this is pretty clear. 52% said yes, only 16% no, and 32 are in that middle ground.
Excellent. Super panelists, display your cards. Excellent. Only one of our panelists, Percival, said no, with the majority believing there is some increased tolerance for risk. Don, you are among the few who believe there is a greater tolerance for risk as a result of the pandemic. Tell us why.
Well, in short, I hope so. I hope there is a greater appetite for risk. I believe that it will continue in the new normal COVID era. You know, many in the drug industry have long resisted accepting the risks associated with changes. I'm reminded of an old phrase that one can manage to succeed or one can manage to not to fail. And so I find in the drug research a great paradox. We have such outstanding science taking us down to the actual strand of DNA in our understanding of the biochemistry. But yet in the management of clinical trials, we manage in the same way we've done it for the last 15 or 20 years. And I think that's a consequence that has been broken through. Now, necessity has been the mother of invention. And so when you had no other options, suddenly telemedicine looks appealing, or remote, or having nurses visit a home to administer a infusion drug to keep a trial going. So we've watched as many of these matters have been accepted. I don't think we're going to return to the days when we were brute force, brick and mortar. You have to go to a clinical site and only a clinical site. I think that new world order has been created and I'm all for it. And I think it's going to really advance the industry.
Don, thanks so much for those great insights. Suresh, what are your thoughts? You need to take yourself off of mute, Suresh. There you go.
Karen, thank you. Thank you, PharmaVOICE, for this opportunity. And also I want to thank all the listeners here who have been doing really hard work along for the last couple of months to take up on their shoulders to make it easy for the rest of the humanity. Yes, I agree with all of the answers there, which said, majority of them said yes. 3 points I would like to really make here. Number one, national leaders across the world to every human being on the planet are eagerly watching pharma industry in this kind of moment in our history. Our drug development ecosystem has no choice but to redefine the word risk and deliver something meaningful, timely to the humanity. That's number one point I make. Okay. Second, COVID-19 has reinforced need not only to collect right data sets from translational side to operational to clinical, but also leverage most advanced analytics to connect the disconnected, disparate data point so that we can speed up the drug development process. That's my second point. Third point, in this time of crisis, every forward-looking pharma exec is realizing how broken our current drug development processes, including the false tolerance for risk in our current SOPs. That means I'm saying standard operating procedures. So these 3 points I'll just bring up as I see drug development ecosystem, including the regulators, as we go through the process of bringing vaccines as well as therapies to the greater good of humanity, we will have a very long-lasting impact on the definition of risk tolerance in the drug development. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to both of you. Dan, let's close out this first section with question number 5.
Our last question is about collaboration. What level of collaboration across the clinical ecosystem do you expect to see in the coming years? Do you think there will be fewer partnerships? We'll stay with the status quo, or more partnerships?
Well, let's hope for, well, I know what I hope for, but.
They are coming in at a good clip, so we'll give everyone another moment.
Awesome.
All right, let's say last call, close the poll, share the results.
Excellent.
And Taryn, you got your wish.
That's what I was hoping for. Super panelists, you know what to do. Show us your answers to question number 5. Yay, I'm so glad to see that you all don't think there will be less collaboration. So Ken, Steve, and Rebecca, you 3 come from very different industry areas of focus, yet all of you are in the same camp in terms of envisioning greater collaboration. I'm looking forward to hearing your perspectives. Rebecca, let's start with you, and then we'll go on to Steve, and then Ken will bring us home. So Rebecca?
Thanks, Taryn. I'm so honored and pleased to be here with everyone today. And I would say from my perspective, you know, I work predominantly in the patient partnership area and across the industry, looking at health equity and disparities. And I really anticipate there's going to be a lot more collaboration across healthcare. I think as a result of the experience that we're seeing now with COVID, you know, solving complex challenges like we're seeing now, it really requires partnerships across all constituents to really bring meaningful solutions forward for patients. It requires health systems, healthcare professionals, caregivers, payers, regulators, everybody really coming together to solve problems. And I think the other learning is the pandemic has really highlighted how fragmented the healthcare system is. And it's also shown us, on the other side of that, how much we can advance healthcare when we do come together to solve these problems and improve the lives of patients. And we see where there are gaps and where we can step in and make a meaningful difference. So I think, you know, this focus can be applied across many disease areas as we move forward. And I think there's going to be a real opportunity for us to have a difference and improve patients so that we can improve patients' lives, so we can address some of these real challenges.
Excellent, Rebecca. Thank you so much. Steve, you're up next.
Thanks, Taryn, and it's great to be here. Kind of an interesting virtual panels, the whole new world.
Whole new world.
You know, so collaboration with this COVID, we've been seeing a lot of partnerships and a lot more than we've ever seen before. Everything from companies offering their manufacturing capabilities to someone that develops a vaccine, to sharing science, to periodic phone calls, of comparing notes on data. Even though there are so many different clinical trials going on, there's a lot going on in terms of partnerships. Even at Oracle, we've been collaborating with the US government, the HHS and BARDA, and we've donated a system that's been in the press called the Therapeutic Learning System to help track patients that have been given off-label medications and how they're doing, both with a doctor being able to report it, as well as the patient being able to sign on and report their journey along the continuum of care. It's also being morphed into an epidemiological kind of study. And so there's a lot going on with the collaboration around COVID. I would like to think, and I am an optimist until the end of the world, that will continue, that unmet medical needs within the industry will foster that kind of partnership. Alzheimer's comes to mind. You know, there's a lot of, you know, it's going to be a huge burden on society. It is going to be its own pandemic in many ways. It'd be nice to see collaboration come together around these massive diseases that are facing our aging population, and the types of collaboration that we now know how to do are done for other unmet medical needs across this industry.
Excellent, Steve. I too am an eternal optimist, so let's hope we're all moving in the right direction. Ken, over to you.
Great, thanks, Taryn, and a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I want to echo the other two responses and say seeing 80+% agreeing here that we're seeing more collaborations, I think really speaks to that level of hope and the opportunity. I'll piggyback on a comment Don made about the necessity, and another great way to think about necessity is the phrase, a great necessity calls for great virtues. One of our great virtues in our industry is that we do collaborate. Often primarily internal collaborations, but increasingly external collaborations. So to hit this point home, the Tufts Center does a roundup of the top 50 pharma companies, and we tally up the number of announced co-development arrangements. And in the last 2 months, we've seen more announcements than the prior 3-year period leading up to the pandemic. So just a remarkable number of partnerships and collaborations. Now what we're seeing is an even broader stakeholder community. So it's including, as Steve and Rebecca alluded to, healthcare professionals, clinical research professionals collaborating on such a broad range of levels, sharing data through registries, interim assessments on trials that are being rapidly initiated, many including frontline professionals, open use and interaction on cloud-based platforms and other online approaches leveraging sophisticated analytics and machine learning, shared manufacturing capabilities, as Steve mentioned, and much closer regulatory sponsor collaboration. A couple really notable collaborations that we're monitoring are the public-private arrangements like Oxford University's Jenner Institute and AstraZeneca, or GSK working with the Getz Foundation there, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations. The NIH is involved now in a number of collaborations. All of these, I think, really speak to the incredible role that necessity is playing in getting us to approach the use of collaborations in even more innovative and intense ways. And I too believe that we've entered sort of a new era. I'm hopeful that we're in a new era in terms of our level of collaboration.
Excellent. Thank you to all three of you. Thank you, Ken, for bringing us to the close of this first section. Great points, and I look forward to seeing an encouraging path forward. Dan, we're on to the technology section of the program. Can you launch question number 6?
Indeed. So the first question in this segment is, where is your company on the adoption curve for technologies like AI, ML, and DL? Are you just getting started? Are you doing some pilot testing? Are you into AI all the way? And while we're waiting for these answers, we're getting some great commentary in the chats, and there's interaction with our panelists and the audience. And also feel free to submit your questions for the Q&A also, because we're going to do that in about the last 15 minutes of this event. So you can use the chat and the Q&A tool. All right, let's call last call on this one and look at the results. So kind of evenly split, 38% just getting started, 34% pilot testing, and 27% are in it all the way.
I would say that matches pretty closely from what I think our panel is going to say. Panelists, show your cards. Some of you all are disappearing there, but it looks like we are about 10% are just getting started, 42% are in the pilot testing phase, and 47% are all in. Michelle Longmire, I'm going to go to you, and then I'm going to hand it over to Craig, because you both answered AI all the way. Can't wait to learn how you are adopting AI to your organizations. Michelle,
sure.
Kick us off.
All right, great. Thanks, Taryn. Thanks, everybody, for enabling us to be here. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's not about AI for AI's sake. It's really, what is the problem to solve? And I think, for me as a practicing physician and a physician scientist, we really need to look at the fact of the matter is, the human brain can handle about 4 variables at once. And at that point, you're really at about the maximum ability of our brain as a computer to really actually solve complex problems. And so when you look at a clinical trial, both on the operational end and on the clinical delivery of care, I think that we really do need to look at models which can evaluate information and optimize better than the human brain. And I think that's really the opportunity that I see for machine learning. So, when you look at the utilization of kind of quantitative or statistical modeling in the stock market, in this algorithmic or quant trading. This has evolved since the 70s. And, there are markets where over 80% of decisions are made by algorithms. And so, you apply that, I think, to the clinical trial domain. And where I see the opportunity really is right now, because we have a pivotal kind of moment in time or window of opportunity where, we're shifting the paradigm from data being captured in clinical settings, which is static and intermittent and infrequent, to data being captured directly from patients. And, this is an opportunity for us to create new technology systems which can handle, evaluate, assess, safety, efficacy, and the management of this better than humans can. And frankly, I think it's a necessary next step. And it can be done, and it can be done well. I don't think it's about machine intelligence. It's about the development of effective models from strong data. And I think, our company, where we're really applying that is to a next generation kind of, you can think of site monitoring. What is monitoring in a decentralized clinical trial? And the application of machine learning to this very complex set of variables, where we're capturing data directly from participants across devices and geographies. One, there's a huge opportunity for error. Two, you have more data. Three, you have new roles. And then, to be able to centralize that in a way that we can really effectively say, we can ensure safety, and we can ensure that we're, optimizing with what we have today on understanding efficacy early. To me, that's a massive opportunity. And in fact, one, I think we're all kind of obligated to rethink how we approach given this shift from site to patient. So I'd say that's the large focus area for us. But I think that the opportunity for machine learning extends, across the clinical drug development and into early development as well. So excited to hear what Craig has to say, because, I know Novartis has a lot of pioneering programs in this space.
Excellent. And Craig, great handoff. So you used a funny term, and I want you to say it because I don't know that I can pronounce it. Craig, to you.
Thanks, and thanks, Michelle. Medible's done some incredible things, and thanks to your team for being a key disruptor in the industry. So, as you know, I work at Novartis. I think we are on the upward slope of enlightenment, if you're familiar with the technology hype cycle. One of our core tenets that comes from Vas, our CEO, is to go big on data and digital, and that encompasses AI. We have a chief digital officer. We have a head of data and digital for drug development, a head of data science and AI, a new AI innovation lab, a robotics and cognitive automation function, various innovation verticals across the company. There's absolutely no shortage of activity, particularly AI, across the drug development spectrum. And for DevOps, we're absolutely tackling the biggest problems that we have, from patient enrollment and digital recruitment, to deriving insights from monitoring visit reports, to building databases in a much more automated way, to creation of documents that go to regulators that can be automatically compiled from various other documents. So I want to focus on two things here. I think that the biggest gap that we see in AI is the buzzwordiness of it, or technically a buzz acronym. And besides blockchain, I would say this is one of the most hypo-understood concepts around. So there's two disconnects within that big gap. The first is the technical reality of what is needed to have a successful AI deployment, and exactly what data and information fuel is needed for an AI engine. We tend to be a very curious bunch, and often when you look under the hood, there's far more to various AI techniques than most realize, and it often gets inadvertently oversold. So you absolutely need the right ingredients to see the true value out of that AI recipe. And those that know AI the most, certainly not me, need to clearly explain what those ingredients are, because from a DevOps point of view, we can clearly say what we're trying to solve and what the problems are that we need to tackle. And secondly, when we look at going from weeks to days, or days to hours and minutes in terms of being able to solve some of these problems, the change management that goes into making that an operational reality is enormous, and it so often gets overlooked. So that is an absolutely key area, perhaps the determinant of a successful AI deployment, that has to be supported with really understanding the organizational impact. We absolutely have to spend time and money on that. and we need an unending and unwavering commitment from the top down to fully embed AI into an organization.
Thanks so much, Craig and Michelle. I appreciate your energy around this topic. And we are going to go from AI to another one of the hottest topics in the industry, virtual trials. Dan, you're up. Question number 7.
Question 7 is, given the current environment, how quickly will virtual, decentralized, and hybrid clinical trials become the norm? Will it be at light speed? Will there be cautious optimism? Is it going to be pilot palooza, or is it never going to happen? Very interested to see the results on this one.
That's all the talk is right now, is about virtual and hybrid clinical trials. So it is going to be interesting to see the results.
Okay, I think we've got about all of them. Let's say last call and close the poll and share the results. So it's not really surprising that people are being cautiously optimistic. What do you think, Ken?
I don't know that I agree with the folks who say never going to happen, but let's see what our super panelists have to say. Please display your answers to question number 7. Yep, about 70% of the panel is cautiously optimistic as well, which gives me optimism. So we have a few folks, who are in pilot palooza, and more than a quarter who are looking to go at light speed. Alistair, you're in the pilot palooza group. And then Don, you're cautiously optimistic. Well, Craig, you are full speed ahead. Craig, let's start with you and tell us why you think hybrid virtual trials will become the norm sooner rather than later.
Thanks, Taryn. I think first off, people are realizing that decentralized research methods are accessible. And that doesn't necessarily mean fully virtual trials, right? Fully virtual trials are still in Pilotville. I agree with that. And very often fully virtual trials are not the right approach for every study. They're not even in some cases what patients are necessarily asking for. But what we've seen are that these decentralized methods have been the primary countermeasure for most sponsors over the last 3 months. That doesn't make it the new normal, right? That just means we've survived with SOP waivers and protocol deviations. That's not commitments. But as sponsors and research community are thinking about new study starts, any study that they want to have happen in 2020 and into 2021, we have to anticipate the probability of a second wave. This industry responds to risk, and risk mitigation today are these very tools that we once considered themselves to be risky. Now, separate from the risk of a second wave, we've also seen this is patient preference right now. There's data that SubjectWell has published that 58% of patients who've shown interest in new studies would have a preference if they include telemedicine and aspects that are decentralized. And that impact is seen globally. I was just looking at data from Continuum Clinical that 60% of Japanese research participants have indicated the same, wanting and being receptive to these types of decentralized approaches. Now, one question people keep coming up with is, do we need FDA changes to stick for these decentralized trials to be adopted? And what I keep wondering is, what changes did the FDA make that people want to see stick? When I read the FDA's guidance document, which has been fabulous, and they keep refreshing the FAQs, and I'm grateful for that, they didn't lower bars to make decentralized trials available. They just simply encouraged thoughtful and appropriate use of these tools that were already there. So my reason for full speed ahead, the last quarter, Q2, was all about trial continuity and pivots. It was our spring of trial continuity. But now that we're coming into Q3, this to me is the time for organizational commitments. It is the summer of commitment. And that means that organizations need to commit around SOPs, vendor changes, training, rethinking how protocols are developed, rethinking their endpoints. And that's what gives me hope that there is a commitment that's being made here. Sponsors pivoted trials to decentralize to accommodate a virus, and now they're going to maintain that commitment to accommodate patients.
Fantastic, Craig. Thank you so much. Don, I know you're cautiously optimistic. Why don't you tell us why?
Hopeful, but cautiously optimistic at the pace at which change is adopted. But I'd like to take a step back and say we can study the effect of COVID, and we have in this panel. But I should like to go back one step and say before COVID, before it was even a concern, the industry was posting in 2019 less than a 1.6% return on investment of its R&D activities. It's unsustainable. It's unsustainable at that amount. Now, add the pandemic to that situation, and you find even more reason to adopt change. The current status quo pre-COVID is simply not going to bring the industry back to where it needed to be. And so what I submit to you is it's not just the COVID situation and the challenges that it has presented to clinical trials, it's the underpinning, the backdrop against which the industry must improve its performance. For that, I remain cautiously optimistic that that will be embraced, and whether it's virtual trials, remote, the reality is telemedicine, for example, the investigators like it, patients like it, it's made it easier to recruit patients into trials. There's a couple of things that have to be addressed though. You're going to have home health care now migrating from care delivery to clinical research, and that's going to carry with it a whole series of changes. Legal issues, do you have physicians on standby when you're infusing a drug in a home? All of those things need to be addressed. But it's time, and I think the financial imperative for the industry will drive it.
Excellent, Don. Thank you so much. Alistair, let's get you up to the plate.
Thanks, Taryn. So I don't necessarily disagree with Craig or Don. I think the industry is heading this way. You know, I am old enough to have been around on a few different big technology changes now. And, you know, the shift to virtual gets very confused. We need to get people using the right nomenclature. You know, I have people asking me constantly about remote monitoring and virtual trials in the same sentence, not the same thing. Mm-hmm. You know, we have got to get clarity from the regulator on what they're looking for, both in, you know, in both those ends, in remote monitoring and in virtual trials. I think Craig mentioned, you know, the FDA guidance. Well, there's been a lot of work by ACRO and other parties helping the FDA get that guidance together and get it out there. You know, and we work in a regulated industry for a reason. When the regulator's not defining what those regulations really are, what does adequate monitoring really mean? You know, a lot of our customers, they'll talk about, yeah, we're doing AI, and yeah, we want to get into this, and yeah, we want a virtual trial. And then when you go to them with a design and say, here it is, all of them back away and say, you know what, not on my program. So I think we need more alignment around the industry and a bit more pragmatism about how we implement these things, and they might get implemented a heck of a lot faster. So, you know, a lot of change management concerns go unaddressed, and we feel around, you know, everybody has a virtual platform at the moment. And it reminds me of DIA 2005. We walked around and saw 1,000 EDC systems, all of which didn't work, bar 2 or 3 of them. So, you know, I've been sold some vaporware in my time, and I've bought it and lived to not fulfill the ROI on it. But I think we need wholesale industry focus on change. Regulator, pharma, service providers. And until that happens, we'll just go round and round in pilot palooza.
I'm back with you in 2005. I remember those days when it was EDC craziness.
Oh, great. The parties were good.
Yeah. Thank you all for these varying perspectives. I think it's really interesting to see where we're going to go, and that there is optimism around the digitization or virtualization of trials. Interesting times ahead for sure. Dan, tee us up for question number 8, which addresses another hot topic, telehealth, which we alluded to earlier.
Absolutely. So as telehealth becomes more mainstream, to what degree will this change your organization's strategies? Will it be highly disruptive? Are you just thinking about it, or do you think it'll have no impact whatsoever?
Okay.
We're getting a lot of votes on this one.
You know, we have telehealth. We're seeing all kinds of reports with telehealth usage going through the roof right now. So what does our audience have to say?
Let's look at the results. Well, it's evenly split between highly disruptive and they're thinking about it. Only 15% thought it would have no impact.
Okay. Well, super panelists, You've got into the groove now. Let's see how you answer question number 8. Well, just about a quarter of you think telehealth will have no impact on your organizations, and the rest of you are nearly split in terms of highly disruptive and contemplating its impact. So, Patrick and Julie, you have contrasting views. Julie, you are expecting big disruption. Let's get you into the conversation. Tell us why, Julie.
Sure, thanks, Taryn. I think it's highly disruptive in a very good way, in that as an industry, we're proving we can speed up clinical research effectively with high quality. We're breaking down barriers. We're collaborating, all stakeholders at the table. Telehealth, telemed is just getting started for us. And as we're looking at bringing this, and COVID brought us there to use it, forced us to take more risks than we're used to taking. We are now collaborating on the challenges, the watch-outs, right? We have a watch-out with telemed that we could start to have impersonal treatment environments, and we might get to be too remote and checklist approach with our subjects and our patients. In addition, some of the telehealth strategies that we've got out there are individual tactics, and for every trial, then there's so many tactics before we have solutions. How do we ensure that the package solution is driving to GCP, GDPR, HIPAA, validation, SOPs across the world, sites, regions, API connections, and then there's the startup timelines, the deployment of all of this. Liability was mentioned earlier, and the legal aspects of it, as well as IP management and storage. So it's very disruptive from the things we have to watch out for, but very, very encouraging that we're finally going there and challenging ourselves to stay there even after COVID.
Thanks so much, Julie. Those are great insights. Now, Patrick, I know that we still haven't resolved your video issue, but I know you can hear us. So I'd like you to take yourself off of mute and give us your thoughts on telehealth.
The beauty is I can actually see myself, so that's actually good. Thanks, Sharon. You know, this is an area that, you know, UBC has kind of jumped out to try and be a little assertive about it. But that said, a couple of things that we've done. We've already built a virtual research platform to support these types of activities. We deployed recently what we call a digital concierge, which is a virtual assistant. So fundamentally, what we're trying to do is assist patients on the patient side to actually be able to kind of engage the support that they're getting through telehealth in a more automated way. What we find is majority of what we've seen thus far is that, you know, there's a doc talking to a patient. It's a pretty benign. It's not anything deep in terms of true medical assessments and things of that nature. So we think there's some significant opportunity. We work with Jefferson on establishing one of these studies that we did with them in terms of true telehealth, where specific machinery was deployed out to patients, and you could actually get true reads in terms of data for analysis. So there's work to be done. Listen, I'm hopeful here. I think this is one of those areas that will, in fact, change the world. We're still early, and I think Alistair was speaking earlier, when you do these things that actually requires multiple stakeholders to change, that's when it takes a little while. So not only does the patient have to kind of assess and make a change, the physicians have to make a change, the research pharma companies have to make the change. So the entire healthcare system has to change. And when you have so many stakeholders have to change, it does take a pretty rigorous amount of time. But we do see possibilities for it, but we think it's going to take some time.
Excellent, Patrick. Thank you so much. Thank you, Julie, as well. It's going to be interesting to see the impact that telehealth has on us as patients, as well as how the industry responds now that we've all had a taste of what virtual health can mean. Dan, up again, time for question number 9.
Yep, let's keep moving. So we'd like to know, how agile is your organization in adopting new technologies? Is it very agile? Do you think it's agile enough? Or do you need a little more flexibility? And this is a short one, so we're going to accelerate through this pretty quick. So get your answers in as soon as you can. And let's say last call and close the poll. And let's look at the results.
Excellent.
So very agile, number one.
Yeah. Super panelists, this was an interesting question for you all. So how agile is your organization? Please display your answer to question number 9. Excellent. More than half of you are super agile. About 36% of you are agile enough, and 2 of you need some stretching. Bonnie, you responded BBK is very agile, and John, you noted Signet has about the right amount of agility. Bonnie, let's start with you. What makes for an agile organization? Bonnie, I think you have to take yourself off.
I've got you, Taryn. I've got you. I think at the core, agility is a cultural issue. And so when you are looking at your systems and your development processes, those need to be both built as platforms for agility, and you need to have the development process in place that supports it. If you're fighting your own people inside, it's very difficult then to bring your customers and the sites and patients forward into new technologies. So that would be my first piece. And then at BBK, we developed our platform called Trial Central Net many years ago and continue to develop that. And our people, our tech team is in-house and we're all together. They're so connected. Our technology team is very connected to the sites and the patients and the end users. And so that also means that we're not fighting a technology barrier where people are hesitant to change tools or not to integrate and match other point solutions or other ways of integrating with other companies' systems. So that's the source of why I say we're very agile.
Excellent, Bonnie. Thanks so much. John, why are you agile enough?
Because I think we're already pretty agile. So as a company, so if you're already pretty agile, then you look at yourself and say, I'm probably agile enough. But I think that I agree with what Bonnie said. I think it all starts with the culture of the organization. And if you're in an organization that prides itself on speed, innovation, thinking about problems in different ways, and you reward that culture and you support that culture, you're going to get a lot of innovation. I think it comes naturally, particularly in the space we're in with technology. I mean, we've got a lot of really young people who are extremely innovative. You know, they're not held back by conventional dogma and you know, what we probably grew up with in terms of the way we looked at things, which is what I believe really drives the change in our industry. And, you know, I think as I look at the situation we're with now, and I look at the things that, you know, are part of agility, it's, you know, your ability to sort of anticipate, respond, react to, and our industry responded and reacted pretty well, I think, to the situation. I think we got off the mark pretty fast. We came together, we collaborated. I don't think we anticipated very well at all. I think, you know, those of us that have been in healthcare, this wasn't a question of if it was going to happen, it was when it was going to happen. And I think this was a wake-up call for everybody, particularly on the healthcare side and pharmaceutical side, around the risk of pandemics, particularly in the kind of environment we're in where people travel everywhere around the world, and how do you control that? So I think you know, in our organization, we really promote agility. I think we, you know, responded very, very well as a company to the pandemic. I mean, we did things, some people already talked about it earlier. We did builds and deployments in 8 days for an IRT or an ECOA system. It normally takes multiple weeks. And it just goes to show you what can happen when you collaborate. So I'd like to see us become, as an industry, and Signet as well, be better at anticipating and not just reacting and responding.
John,
so those are just a few thoughts.
Oops, sorry, excellent thoughts. Those are great. Dan, please launch the poll to close out this section. Question number 10.
And the last question in this section is, can technology and science live together harmoniously? Is it a happy marriage? Is it a rocky relationship? Or are they like oil and vinegar? And while we're waiting, I just want to remind people, if you do submit a question for the Q&A, if you want a specific panelist to respond to it, just mention that in your question. Thank you. Okay, let's close the poll and see the results. And it looks like almost a huge majority think it's a happy marriage. A few think it's a rocky relationship. Very few think it's like oil and vinegar.
Excellent. Super panelists, show us your questions. I love this, your answers. I love this question. It's the yin and yang of our industry. So awesome. Almost 3/4 of you believe there can be harmony between science and technology, which reflects back to our audience poll. 25% of you not so optimistic. So James and Mark, let's get you into the conversation. You had opposite responses to this question. James, why don't you start us off and tell us why there can be a happy marriage? Jim Corrigan, you're up. And I think you're on mute, Jim.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I really love this question. I think it's good to start with the definition though. Harmony necessitates that each of us be aware of the expectations and requirements of one another and then adapt to maximize the situation. John talked about it, we are all adapting, and a great example of harmony that we see within ERT is how science and technology has really evolved across our 6 clinical endpoints and the 3,000 clinical trials that we participate in. But we want to make sure we start with science, and our science ensures that tech meets the requirements from a regulatory accuracy, but also from a repeatability perspective. Our 40 years of experience really ensures that our digital solutions meet those requirements, but most importantly focuses on the users, those users being patients and sites, and we do it in a frictionless manner. Examples of harmony that we've seen is in imaging trials, when a radiologist has to deviate from their protocol for the specifics of a clinical trial, or in a pulmonary exam, when the interaction between a site and a patient has many, many maneuvers in order to get that information from the patient, or in a CNS endpoint collection, where movement and evaluation of those movement disorders is really critical. So when we looked across our 3,000 clinical trials ERT, we saw, and we feel it today, the pressures that sites and patients and sponsors are really feeling, and we believe that tech can reduce that burden and subjectively show increase in accuracy and effectivity. I really believe that science and technology are enabling us to really have more than just endpoints where users and sponsors work together, but really develop robust solutions that really tackle some of the problems that we're seeing today through COVID, but also some of the problems that we're going to see in the future. So I really believe that tech really can benefit everyone, but again, we have to do it in a harmonious manner. That means we have to respect one another and we have to adapt.
Excellent, Jim. Thank you so much. Mark, tell us why you think it's a little bit more of a rocky relationship.
Yeah, and ultimately I do think that there is a happy marriage there. But I think right now, I think we are not at an equilibrium, right? And I think, in fact, I think they can create a challenge, right? And I think that creates a rocky relationship between science and technology. I think technology is undoubtedly driving and advancing society. Technology affects the ways we communicate, we learn, we think. It helps society determine how people interact with each other on a daily basis. Technology plays a role in society today, both positive and negative, impacting daily lives. But we have to look at technology as an enabler of solutions, right? A tactic in the how and not necessarily the what. I think the rocky relationship between science and technology will persist, right? If we think that we think of technology as the device versus how it can help us address challenges in society and medicine, right? So if we come back to the situation today where we're in with COVID-19, technology is not going to be the solution to COVID-19. It's going to be helping to aid us supporting the discovery of a solution. I learned about a device recently, a wearable device, right, which measures temperature and heart rate, and potentially it could be used as a way to identify if patients have symptoms associated with COVID-19. I mean, that's a great example of how technology is enabling to identify patients, but it's not necessarily the solution, right? So we need new innovative medicines that will treat and cure. I think if we can harness the assistance of technology, we can reach that equilibrium and we can reach that happy marriage, right? And that's where technology speeds up solution finding. We need to be pragmatic. We need to be pragmatic that technology itself is not the solution, but it's the assistant, right? So when I think about it, it's like technology is the supporting actor, while science is the leading star. And if the supporting actor takes the spotlight, then we lose sight of who is leading whom.
Excellent. Thank you so much. to both of you. These are great insights. And here's hoping for a synergistic future. We're now halfway through the program, so thank all of you for keeping your energy up as we push through to the other side. We're about 5 minutes behind, so we were going to continue at a vigorous clip. On to our next section, which is innovation and business models. 2 topics that are always of interest to our audience. Dan, post question 11. Thank you.
Question 11 is about innovation. Where's your organization on the innovation curve? Are you at the starting line or ahead of the competition? Just pick one of the quartiles that we have laid out for you. Okay, they're coming in good.
Excellent.
I am going to say last call, close the poll, and let's look at the results. So the leader here, 51 to 75, followed right behind, 76 to 100, Taryn.
Excellent. Super panelists, you know what to do. Flash those cards. Excellent. Our panel also covers the gamut. Let's talk to 2 folks who are ahead of the curve, Dr. Goldman and then Dr. Rogas. We'll go back to you, Mark. Dr. Goldman, let's start with you. Let's get you into the conversation.
Great, thank you. It's a pleasure to participate. So I think you have to think about innovation within also the scale of the company that or organization that you're working within. So I'm in a mid-sized pharmaceutical company, and I think we tend to use a kind of a network model, if you will, where we don't push innovation down from the top, and it's not completely from bottom up and can be disorganized. So what we try to do is we try to bring the innovation from multiple stakeholders, individuals, teams, and then network that within adjacencies and the larger organizational units to curate and bring that innovation into our scientific and business conduct. Now, you also have to think about the areas or really what you're working within as well in terms of innovation. So we tend to be focused in CNS, and that's a difficult area of drug discovery and development, and it's proved to be very difficult with companies exiting recently. So we've had to take risk. Risk goes along with innovation, and we've had to take risk in discovery, development. We've taken some non-traditional approaches, abandoning, for some indications, target-based approaches, and use more novel, target-agnostic approaches. In the drug development process, we've also needed to be innovative in terms of learning from our previous trials, using big data in order not to do multiple studies just to try to get a positive result. And then ultimately, the innovation has really got to be fostered by the culture. The organization's got to reward innovation and continuously learn from its success as well as failures. Thank you.
Dr. Goldman, thank you so much. Mark, I'm going to go back to you one more time.
Yeah, look, you know, I work at J&J and Janssen, right? And at the heart, right, we're an innovation-based company. J&J started 130 years ago. But if you kind of look right to the beginning, right, it was following cutting-edge science at the time. A couple of brothers from what we call Johnson & Johnson today, right, saw Lister's theories of bacteria and the potential for creating sterile, you know, first aid dressings. You know, they started that company with 12 people. There were more women than men at the time in an old wallpaper factory, right? And at the heart of that, at the heart of creating sterile bandages, right, was this idea of innovation, of doing something that hadn't been done before. In fact, the company at the time actually had to provide education on how to use a Band-Aid, right? We'd call that education today. It's quite amazing when you think about it. They started that with cutting edge science. If we had a company now starting with 12 people using that latest scientific information, we'd call it a biotech, right? And so that kind of idea of innovation still persists at our 134-year-old startup at J&J. You know, innovation can take many forms, but I hope that we are securely planted on the curve in where, you know, where we are in terms of focused on bringing innovation, that we're bringing disruptive innovation, technologies that are going to really advance care for patients. Rob mentioned this, and I think it's really important. We have to create an innovation culture. That's so important. And an innovation culture is one where inclusiveness and embracing of diversity is woven into the fabric of all we do. You know, we're in the midst of a tumultuous times right now around race, equity, fairness, and discrimination. What's clear is that innovation culture is the most effective when we see the problem and we seek the answers with no division, no exclusion, no discrimination. And innovation is not, is not the mind or expertise of one kind or one person. Innovation is possible from a diverse workforce with different views, talents, and understandings. So we need to embrace that diversity and inclusive culture to be able to improve and kind of maintain our goal for kind of human health. When you think about oncology for a second, which is the world that I work in, in the past, we focused on incremental advances. Now we need to be bold. We don't need to talk about one compound or one therapeutic approach. We need to think about how do we build innovation through building regimens towards disease interception and delivering cures, right? That's what innovation is about. And we have to set that goal clear, and we have to be thoughtful about it. So innovation has to be bold, has to be transformative. It takes leaders and organizations to set that bar from the very, very top. And we need to know where we're going and how to get there. And as part of that, I think we can deliver incredible therapies and powerful treatments, ultimately trying to give patients what they really want, which is hope.
Excellent. Thank you to both of you. Those are great observations. And we love hearing how your different organizations are approaching innovation. Dan, let's move on to question 12.
We'd like to know, what is the best way to approach innovation? Is it a top-down process? Is it a bottom-up process? Or should every voice be heard? This is going to be a quick one.
Yep.
Okay, let's say last call.
So.
And every voice, 78%, Taryn.
Yes, excellent. Know how I love a voice. Super panelists, tell us about your leadership style. Display your answer to question number 12. And not surprisingly, the voices have it. An overwhelming majority of you are open to having input from throughout the organization. So Percival, let's get you into the conversation. Then I'll ask Steve to provide his perspectives. Percival?
Thank you, Tara, and good afternoon, everyone. Innovation is at the heart of who we are as a pharma industry. It's our DNA, it's why we exist. And so it's important to take a step back and really ask ourselves, why, or more importantly, who innovation is for. And so, as trite as it may seem, we approach innovation with a singular focus on the patient, and continuously defining, redefining, and shaping our approach to innovation embedded and rooted on patient centricity. And we achieve this through a science-first approach. And this approach allows us to focus on the best science, empower the best talent to pursue, agnostic of its source, whether it's an Astellas site in Chicago or San Diego, or the Bay Area or Boston or Pacific Northwest, or in collaboration with our partners. The last thing I'll say, though, is that innovation for innovation's sake, frankly, is meaningless. And innovative therapies that we develop, frankly, must reach the patients who need them. And therefore, an approach to innovation must be coupled with a focus as well on patient access. And that we bring the same creative and innovative mindset that we have on engaging with healthcare system partners as we would in the labs to ensure that our medicines are accessible to patients. So in sum, COVID has not really changed our approach to patient care innovation. Rather, it's really reinforced how important it is to have a science-first approach, focus on innovation, and to make sure that the patient is the center of everything that we do.
Excellent. First of all, thank you so much for giving us a glimpse into what Astellas is doing. Steve, talk to us about your approach at Oracle.
So innovating a tech company is slightly different than innovating a pharma company. And, we in the software business, we try to predict what our customers are going to need a couple of years down the road and what's going to make their jobs better. The role of software in this ecosystem, in my opinion, is to be mostly invisible, to allow people to create therapies that help patients. I don't want people driving to work thinking about they have to work with Oracle systems. I'd rather than just drive to work thinking about doing their jobs. In order to accomplish that in a software company, you got to listen to everybody. Every engineer that's writing a line of code, every person that's training a customer, all has ideas on how to incrementally make those things better. And innovation, for the most part, is incremental. Even the iPhone, which everybody will say, oh my God, how innovative was that? Was incremental. I had a BlackBerry that had mail and phone, right? So these things tend to be evolutionary. So the way you train customers and the way that you develop technologies. Oracle has an entire group of people that are completely dedicated to advanced technologies and sprinkle around the rest of Oracle. AI, machine learning, we incubate small startups, We do research grants for interesting products. We're doing one with the University of Alabama for cervical cancer in Cameroon. We're doing one with the Wake Forest Institute for Regenerative Medicine. We work collaboratively with these to try to advance things that make sense in it. And the one area that I think this industry can innovate, and this is my little soapbox, I'm glad that Bonnie's on this call. I haven't seen you in a while, Bonnie. Hi, Bonnie. Innovating around recruitment. And I think Bonnie's been trying to wrestle this thing since the beginning of time, but it's going to take a society to treat patients differently. It's service. It's like the military. It's people sacrificing their bodies for the greater good, and I think they need to be recognized for that. That would be a major innovation around society, to treat clinical trial participants as if they were heroes rather than, don't tell anybody you're in this trial.
Yep.
So that's it. I had to throw my soapbox in just a little bit, Taryn. You've heard.
I love the soapbox, Steve. And you know, Ken's been out there beating the drum forever as well. So, and we appreciate his efforts. Thank you, Percival and Steve. These are great conversation points. Sorry to say, we got to move on. Dan, question 13, which is one of my favorite.
Yeah, question 13. Do you envision operations going back to normal after COVID-19? Yes, it's going to go back to normal. Somewhat, but maybe some tweaking needed. Or normal, there is no normal anymore. So we'll just give you a second more. And let's say last call. And look at the results. 56% think there's still some tweaking needed maybe. It won't be quite the same way. And another 42%, nope, there's no normal anymore. Taryn?
Well, you know what camp I'm in, but let's see what our super panelists have to say. Display your cards. Normal, not normal, or somewhat normal? Excellent. I actually was surprised to see these results from you all. As I'm in the know, there is no normal camp anymore. This is an opportunity for industry to go beyond normal and be extraordinary. But let's hear from the experts. Shirish, can you tell us about why you think there is no normal anymore?
All right. Thank you, Taryn. Look, a simple answer is yes, there's not going to be new normal. Our professional and personal lives have been evolving over the last 3 months to a new normal, or new abnormal, I should say. This will have a long-lasting impact on what we do in the drug development industry too. All the parties associated with drug development industries have the same kind of realization what we are going through over the last 3+ months. And it's not over, as we heard from many panelists here. And COVID-19 is allowing us to challenge our own age-old methods. And we will adapt technology, like Michelle said earlier, or Craig and Craig said, or several of them said earlier, more aggressively for the entire drug development process, rather than living with the currently broken, erroneous, suboptimal methods or processes. I think that's going to challenge us. This is currently challenging us, but we will continue to allow ourselves to take up that challenge. That's how I see it.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was going to go over to James, if that's okay. James?
Yeah, thanks, Taryn. Thanks, Suresh. I think we're already seeing movement in the industry taking us back in some instances to where we're operationally seeing how things were before COVID. Simultaneously, we're seeing a desire and surge, as we've all talked about on the panel, to really operate in a more virtual manner, whether it's using video, mobile tech, or sensors. So all of us on the panel are partnering, as we've been talking about in existing studies, to have patients and sites interact through the use of technology, which is really enabling some of our trial operations to not just keep up, but also to accelerate. Now, there's a lot of benefit and need for face-to-face visits, so I'm not saying that we don't need that. But in many cases, those interactions really aren't always essential. And all of us on the panel have been seeing amazing advancements in the consideration and use of virtual visit technology. Offering virtual visits will remove the burden to patients by reducing their need to travel to sites. Interacting digitally, whether it's sharing screens, collecting data, really enables frictionless interaction between patients and sites, and obviously more accuracy for the sponsors. So I know that some of these processes will return to the traditional patient-site interaction, but others will virtualize. And we're seeing this hybrid model that's evolving across the 230,000 sites and millions of patients that we work with at ERT. So I think our perspective is trials and sponsors and sites will leverage the advanced technologies to better engage patients. Trials will have some traditional, but also digital elements, and the interaction between that is going to be this hybrid model. But bottom line is, we're going to see a different scenario post-pandemic, and it is going to be a hybrid model that emphasizes optionality, maximizes safety, efficacy, and efficiency for sponsors, sites, but most importantly, the key to this whole thing, which is patients.
Excellent. Thank you so much for both of you giving us a peek into the future. Dan, moving right along, cue up question 14.
Even in this severe downturn, there are pockets of growth. Where are they? Are they in digital technology, real-world data, telehealth, wearables, something else, or all of the above?
I know it isn't fair to only limit the choices to a couple, but we had to corral the responses. So let's see where we are, Dan.
Okay. All of the above, the big winner, Taryn.
I love it. Super panelists, show us what you have to say. Yep, digital comes out the big winner here with telehealth and real-world evidence as strong contenders. Jamie, you've been very patient. Let's get you to talk about real-world evidence and why you think this is a growth area. And Bonnie, we'll turn to you to one of your passions in patient support and engagement. Jamie, kick us off.
Taryn, thank you. I think what we've seen recently is definitely a growth in advanced data aggregation services. We now have access to large data sets because of improvements in technology, whether that's storage or processing, some of the newer systems and applications, things like tokenization, are allowing us to bring data together from disparate EMRs, pharmacy, labs, ePro, and do that in real time. So we now have much more holistic, longitudinal data sets for patients across more diversified patient populations. That's allowing us to do both traditional analysis and then machine learning and AI-based pattern recognition across real-world data. I think that's hugely important. We've seen a lot of movement on remote monitoring and decentralized trials. I probably won't spend a lot of time on that, but I think the technology is definitely enabling there and greater adoption. And I think we've seen the agencies and the legislators move on real-world evidence as well, and incorporating real-world evidence as part of the approval process. So not just relying on randomized controlled studies, but really incorporating enriched data sets that reflect the real world, including areas like synthetic control arms, where we can start to improve and make study design more efficient and bring in both placebo and active control arms to compare new therapies against. So I think we've seen a lot of movement even in a downturn.
Jamie, thank you so much. Bonnie, over to you. And I need you to take yourself off of mute.
Thank you, Taryn.
You're welcome.
What for me, the major drivers of patient support and engagement are understanding patient motivation and understanding what barriers there are to participation. So motivation is really based on an in-depth assessment of the protocol and why potential study participants would benefit from being in a trial. So over the past few years, clinical leadership have come to understand the value of supporting patient access to studies. And we've seen even more of that, removing the barriers through travel assistance or at-home visits as examples. So with COVID-19, both motivation and access are further challenged. And so that is leading to an even greater attentiveness at leadership in sponsor organizations, at research sites, among CROs, to invest more in patient support and engagement. So they become more critical and therefore are growing significantly.
Excellent. Thank you both. And we look forward to seeing where your predictions take us in the near future. Dan, on to question 15 to close out this section.
That's right. Will the industry need to rethink its market access strategies? Yes, the system is broken, or no, everything is fine.
This should be a really quick one.
I don't think it's going to be shocking.
I don't think it's going to be shocking either.
All right, let's close the poll and see how the results look. 92% think the system is broken, Taryn.
And let's see what our panelists have to say. Show us your cards. Jim, I think we have a little bit of a mixed group. I think that most of you all believe that the system is broken. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Michelle. Let's kick us off and see what you have to say about this topic.
Sure. So thanks, Taryn. I guess, again, when it comes to market access, not only are we involved in it from kind of an R&D, getting drugs into, new effective therapies to patients, but I think as a physician, I can speak firsthand to, so many of the challenges that exist in really effectively getting therapies to patients and sustaining the impact of those therapies to maximize the health outcomes. And this is just a huge challenge. And so, I think taking the opportunity to look at where we are today, if I were, strategizing around market access, given the current environment, I would be looking far around the corner beyond what do we do when people are at home, to really thinking about the fact that I think we have one of the biggest opportunities right now, driven by, a kind of societal-wide, worldwide change in human behavior that this has opened the door to. So, we see this in the numbers, right? People are using virtual care. People are accessing their doctors in new ways. We're delivering trials in new ways. And so I think fundamentally, if I were driving market access strategies, I would definitely shift those to a patient-centric and not a provider-centric model that was very oriented around systems that enabled patients to make informed decisions and access those medications and benefit from those medications in a way that leveraged the provider in a way to maximize the outcomes, but not in the time nor efficiency. And so, I think I would really shift things. I think when you look at everyone, and then also specifically, populations who are digital first or digital native, there's a real opportunity to shift the market access directly to these, patients, and to totally disrupt and redefine how we do this in a way that I hope will drive more equity in the healthcare system and far better patient outcomes. Because, look at COVID, is really limiting, we're seeing the effects of it and the outcomes of the disease, and we need to tackle that head on. And I think this is an opportunity.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Patrick, I'm going to ask you to take yourself off of mute, and you're up.
I did. Okay, great. Appreciate those comments. I will say this is, I would say this is an area that's going to continue to come under stress. A current model that says, you got to sort of make these phone calls, try to get a patient on product, whether it be clearing their benefits through their insurer. It's just a model that's definitely under change. Where we are today, and actually what we're doing with Pharma already, is removing those phone calls. So fundamentally, what we've done thus far is we've actually moved to where we approached PBMs, and through our ability to get to their APIs, we've been able to move what would normally take anywhere from 24 to 48 hours for just clearing a patient's benefits to seconds. So that's been dramatic in terms of getting patients on product faster. However, I think where we need to go is, in fact, the more empowerment to the patient, more direct to the patient. And that process is underway, where electronically are removing the need for communicating with the physician, but to go directly inside the physician's workflow and therefore be able to kind of contact and get direct association with the patient through digital mechanisms is where we think it's got to go next. So it's going to be an evolution as it moves along in terms of removing the burdens that it requires to get patients cleared to get on product, but we are seeing some really good things happening already. I think this will continue to be improved as we move forward.
Excellent, Patrick. Thank you so much. And thank you, Michelle. Dan, we're in the home stretch, and this is the last section in case you're keeping score at home. And it's all about patients, which is why we're all in this industry together. So please launch question number 16.
Yep, we've already started and we're getting a lot of results in. When does the patient perspective come into play when making strategic decisions? Is it at the start of every project, during the testing phase, or not until commercialization? I don't think this one's going to be too shocking either.
Let's see what we do.
Let's say last call, end the poll, share the results. 87%, Taryn, at the start of every project.
Excellent. Super panelists, show us what you got. Excellent. The good news is that patients are playing a significant role in how you and your organizations approach strategic decision-making. More than half of you either involve patients at the start of every project or at every stage along the way. And Mark, you bring them in during the testing phase. So Percival, kick us off, and then we'll go over to Craig Lipset. So Percival?
Thanks, Taryn. You know, it's important that we incorporate the patient perspective at the beginning of every strategic project or every strategic decision that needs to be made. At the end of the day, you know, our raison d'etre is really to ensure that we continually serve patient needs. And so ergo, when making strategic decisions, patient centricity is not simply a nice to have, but it really is core to what we do every single day. Now, that said, Astellas has really evolved on this thinking over the last decade. And while the responsibility to really focus on the patient rests on every employee, you know, several years ago now, we formalized this process by establishing a robust global patient centricity organization whose main remit is to really ensure that we listen to and incorporate patient perspectives in every single phase of drug discovery, of development, and finally of commercial delivery. You know, and also as we're able to continually evolve our approach to decision making, our processes and our infrastructure are then enhanced based on these patient insights. And in doing so, what we're able to do is to really ensure that when the patient has entrusted us with their experiences and perspectives, we're effectively embedding this information into our decision-making process and translate them into tangible actions that will hopefully have an impact on patient well-being.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Percival. Craig, as a patient advocate, I'm looking forward to your perspectives.
Thanks, Taryn. Thanks, Percival. Patient perspective clearly begins at day zero, but it has to continue throughout a study and beyond. And at day zero for study planning, I think what we've seen is the industry had kind of moved from version 1 to version 2. Version 1, industry was capturing patient input, but it was sporadic. It was anecdotal. It would happen here in rare disease and there in oncology. And in version 2, we're seeing organizations mature to having more widespread adoption, more consistency, but it's still a bit of the Wild West. We still have some teams trying to figure out how to engage with advocacy and others with online community and others convening focus groups. The next generation to me is a more of a framework-driven approach, where we start to see a level of maturity where organizations can pair the right questions with the right channels for insight. And of course, that's going to continue throughout the duration of studies, as mature organizations today are already capturing patient insight into experience during trials, helping to inform everything from site performance to are we introducing the right interventions and countermeasures for patient experience, and pull that all the way through to study end. I have to give a shout out to one of my favorite projects we delivered at Pfizer, to Pfizer Link, that was supported by David Leventhal from my team, bringing to life the first alumni club for patients who completed studies. And I think it's a great demonstration of the ability to take advantage of continued insights even when your study is complete.
Thanks so much, Craig, and thank you, Percival. Dan, question 17, if you please.
Okay, what percentage of a slowdown have you witnessed in terms of patient recruitment as a result of the COVID-19 crisis? And those are also in quartiles. Okay, we're going to get through this one real quick.
Excellent.
So let's say last call, close the poll, and share the results. So the middle quartiles were the largest, Taryn, and a little bit in the lowest one, and a pretty good chunk in the top quartile.
Yeah, we'll see how that compares to our panelists. See your cards. Yep. So the good news is only 3 of our thought leaders saw a significant slowdown at the highest levels, and the rest of you were split almost equally. Julie, you are one of the folks who saw very little slowdown. Tell us about your experience.
Sure. Our experience really demonstrated that while COVID has certainly had physical limitations with respect to patient participation in the trials, the acceleration of digital technology has kind of counterbalanced that for us related to patient recruitment. As a company, we probably saw about a 20 to 25% dip, and it really depended on the indication. We do a lot of work in oncology and rare disease, and certainly when you have life-threatening illnesses, patients remained motivated even though we suddenly were working differently. In some of our general quality of life indications, it was a little bit more, we saw the dip might have gone a little bit, dramatic. I think overall we saw more disruption in Europe and less in the US, and that has a lot to do with shifting to a remote play. Really in Europe, you've got privacy conservatism that probably resulted with that more so than in the US. But now what we're seeing coming in the stability place of COVID is that those that shut down altogether are being more active in opening up and being a little bit more bold in coming back to business. I think the area where we saw the biggest impact was initiating new trials. For us, working with our clients, it was, should we start, should we wait? Will it be another month, 2 months, 3 months? Should we start up now? So those were the areas that we saw. I would say as we come out of COVID, there may be another big dip that we see due to a new virus or pandemic. The good thing is that we hold on to the lessons we've learned, and we make sure we're serving all stakeholders, putting the patient first, but then looking at the impact on the sites as we've gone remote, the impact on us as a client or a CRO, and keep this stakeholder view in mind.
Excellent, Julie. Thank you so much. As we sprint to the end, I want to welcome Patrick to the video panel. So, hi, Patrick. Dan, we're in the home stretch. Let's sprint ahead. Question 18.
Sprinting away. How progressively are metrics being used to measure patient engagement in drug development? Is it very much so, somewhat, or not at all?
Again, this should be a pretty quick response.
Yeah, in the spirit of sprinting, let's say last call, close it down, look at the results. 61% say somewhat. Taryn?
Okay. Panelists, what are your thoughts? All right, it looks like a great way to make sure that metrics are being used to measure patient engagement. Just over a quarter of the panel responded they are using metrics in a robust way. That leaves about 75% of the panel needing to step up their activities. So, Sir Watson, you indicated vary in terms of the way metrics are being used to measure engagement. Tell us about your experience.
Absolutely, Taryn. Thank you very much. This has been very insightful and a fantastic dialogue here. Patient engagement metrics needs to be looked across the trial continuum. If you really look at referrals, being referred to a trial, that part of patient engagement is almost like targeting and identifying suitable candidates, and the metrics are very similar to marketing metrics. So we uses towards consumers around how much of reach and frequency and who do you touch and how do you bring that together. During the trial initiation process, the engagement metrics are more about getting them onboarded, how easy it is to be understanding the consent form and really the study requirements, and the engagement metrics are more about how do you get them into the trial and make sure that there's not much of attrition. When you get to trial conduct, the engagement metrics goes much more around number of dropouts or number of dropouts without serious conditions. And really you're looking at metrics and engagement around keeping and retaining patients. And there are other proactive engagement measures on how engaged are the patients in the trial through measures like PAM and others, where you can really assess how engaged patients are about their own health and therefore how they respond to and become part of the trial. Overall, patient metrics is a very critical part of it, and digital tools and technology really help out through ePros and other mechanisms to really assess engagement. And today, we're trying to do that from questionnaires to a much more of a proactive manner through digital and digital technology. But what is more important is patient engagement should actually be starting in the beginning. It should be part of protocol design and should be really thought about where we can bring patients and patient advisory groups into the protocol creation so that we can put the appropriate engagement metrics right up front. I think when we want to orchestrate outcomes for our patients, thinking about them from the get-go and really measuring and monitoring how we can engage them to a better future and tomorrow are all very critical aspects of this.
Excellent, Sravasan. Thank you so much. Dr. Goldman, your turn.
Yeah, so I agree. I think we've done some, but I think we can really do more here. Study participants, be they healthy volunteers or patients, are vital stakeholders in our development process. The challenge is really how to do it. In my experience, we do measure patient engagement, but we do it indirectly. We do it through the investigator, we do it through clinical sites, which are in turn directly interacting with patients and study participants. And then sometimes, of course, we receive the engagement metrics from our CRO partners. And also, we've begun to increasingly work with patient advocacy groups, especially when it's been in disease areas where it might be difficult to engage or recruit patients in trials. But there's an opportunity to be more consistent and systematic with regard to patient engagement metrics and development before, during, and after our trial conduct. This can help us design and shape the trial experience with the goal of reducing burden, instrumentation burden for patients during the clinic visits over the course of the trial. This could lead to better trial retention. And we've also begun to engage patients at the protocol development process in terms of instrumentation. But while desirable, that's not easy either, because it can be very challenging with protocol timelines and also kind of harnessing that input. So at the end of the day, we need a clinical trial ecosystem that's healthy. We've got to work together as an industry. We have to work with patient-facing organizations. And we've got to get this more embedded in our clinical trial food chain, if you will.
Excellent. Thank you so much. It goes back to our earlier question about collaboration. So thank you so much for your great insights and why it's so important to track patient engagement. Dan, let's move to question 19. We're almost at the end, folks. And if you haven't submitted your questions, this would be a great time to do it. So Dan, take us away.
Very important question here. Is the industry doing all it can to ensure diversity in clinical research? Do you think that yes, all hands are on deck? Are there some pockets of movement, or no, we must do better? So let's say last call. Close the poll, share the results. More than half of the audience thinks we can still do better. What do you think, Taryn?
I think we're going to see what our panelists think. Let's see what you all have to say. Yep. I think that all of you are almost in unilateral agreement that while there has been some movement, the industry must and can do better, and that means all hands on deck. So Ken, I know you have some definite views on this topic. Then I'll ask Jamie to weigh in. Ken, take us away.
Thanks, Taryn. And I want to acknowledge, even before diving in, that the clinical research enterprise overall, in words and action, have shown a renewed and deepening commitment to improving diversity in the workforce, as well as participant diversity in clinical trials. But if you look at robust research studies that have been conducted and published in the literature, we see that we can and must do much, much better. In a study that we just completed where we looked at the past decade of all pivotal trials supporting drug and biologic approvals, and these were based on disease prevalence rates within population subgroups, we found that participants in Black and African descent communities were highly underrepresented across nearly every therapeutic area that we evaluated. 3 times as many participants in this patient population should have been enrolled to achieve representation. Hispanic and Latinx participants were also underrepresented, most notably in oncology studies. And if you look across that 10-year period, these disparities have not improved. And past research has also demonstrated a high level of underrepresentation among Black and Hispanic Latinx investigators. We've seen a lot of research conducted among the patient community by CISCRP and BBK and others that really demonstrates the majority of participants regardless of their demographic subgroup, have a high willingness to participate in clinical trials, but a similarly high percentage tell us that they were never asked to participate. There were not opportunities for them. Clinical trials were not accessible to them. So there's clearly so much more that must be done. And there are a number of fundamental areas where we can do better. In fact, the FDA and EMA have really weighed into this area as well, looking at some of the draft guidelines that they've provided where we might see improvements in our clinical trial enrichment strategies. Earlier in our discussion, we talked about improving access within large minority community settings through enhancing convenience to the trials and the use of decentralized models. And lastly, an area near and dear to us, just providing more effective and culturally sensitive public and patient education and engagement. So I'm glad to see that there's generally widespread agreement that we can and must do more. Thanks, Taryn.
Thank you so much, Ken. Jamie, to you.
Taryn, thank you, and thank you, Ken. Yeah, Ken always has great insight and great data. I think I'm more in the pockets of movement camp. I think we've seen stakeholders increase their social consciousness and awareness. And I think that improvement initially came from an increased focus around the patient, so call it patient centricity, but that it's actually extended beyond that. I think we've done better epidemiological work and now understand that diseases affect different populations differently. So whether it's not just genetics, ethnicity, race, gender, age, I think these are all important factors as well. And patients are not the same. Yes, they're living with the same disease, but it's not a homogeneous group. And I think that's raised awareness across most of the stakeholder groups. So not just the pharma industry itself, but also the regulators and all those that are sort of part of that population. The burden of the same disease is different across different and diverse populations. I think we know that, and it's important to study the impact of disease and drug effectiveness and the right dosing for different patient populations. And then the importance of things like social determinants of health. So yes, a patient has a disease, yes, we can treat them, but what other factors go on with that patient that affect outcomes? I think we've seen some improvement. I think back into 1993, the NIH had released the Revitalization Act that focused on federal funding and diversity of those studies that were receiving federal grants. I think more recently, the FDA published guidelines last year, encouraging sponsors to take more of an active role, eliminating the need to review stipends or reimbursement for travel as not causing undue influence. I think that was important. The NIH has also recently launched the All of Us research program. I think that's definitely helping, and we've seen uptake from sponsor companies on that side. And then organizations like SCRS have increased diversity awareness across their group. I think it's important to realize that it's not just diversity in clinical trial participation. I think it's got to be diversity at the site level, so the investigators, and do they serve the populations that are sufficiently diverse? It's on us and sponsors to realize that you can't keep going back to the same sites that have prior experience. We're going to have to find ways of bringing naive investigators or research naive investigators into the clinical trial process. That's already starting, but we have to see it in our own workforce and back even into research and discovery to make sure that the research is going towards those diseases that impact different populations. And I think we have seen that as well. So I think there are some encouraging signs, but still a lot to be done.
I couldn't agree with both of you more. So thank you so much for those thoughtful insights. Next, we are at the end, question 20 out of 20. Thank you to all of you who have stayed with us, and we will look forward to getting to as many questions as we can. Okay, Dan, question 20.
Last but not least, do you think patients will be more inclined to engage in clinical trials as a result of COVID-19? Yes, maybe, or no? As Taryn mentioned, we are entering our Q&A session in a couple minutes, so stick around and submit your questions if you haven't yet. All right, let's close the poll, share the results. Over half said yes, Taryn.
interesting because I am surprised because our panel didn't necessarily agree with that. We were split. So I am going to ask Rebecca to close us out with her optimistic outlook for the future.
Thanks, Taryn, and I am an optimist. I have to tell you that I think there's a great opportunity. Yeah, so if you could see my hand sign, here we are. I think the patients will be more inclined to engage in clinical trials just as a result of the solutions that are being tested today. I mean, it is science that is going to bring us out of this situation. And I think, you know, what so many of the comments today have represented the fact that bringing new innovative solutions, it requires all of us. I think there is one really important element, and that we've touched on it all day today, and that is, if we are able to bring trials to patients and doing that in their homes, then I believe they will be willing to participate, and we can do this. I think we, you know, acknowledge there's a lot of distrust, and certainly people are scared, and there's lots of barriers that are very, very well recognized. But patients are looking for solutions, and I think, you know, this opportunity that we have is more important than ever. And because we've seen a surge of patients being treated in their homes, and telehealth has become a real standard for treating patients, I think we need to bring clinical trials as a treatment option for patients. And when we're able to bring trials to patients' home, it becomes a treatment option like any other standard therapy. And so, you know, I think this is one of the good learnings that we're going to get from this pandemic. And as long as we can bring it in this way, then I think there will be a real willingness to participate.
Rebecca, I agree. If there's one silver lining, this may be it. So thank you, Rebecca, and thanks to the rest of our amazing panelists for your participation. Hopefully Old School, New School was a success. And thanks to all of you who have been so active in the chat box and for submitting your questions. Thank you, Dan, for being at the control panel. Now let's further open up the engagement and get to some of the questions from the community. So I'm going to try to queue them up as well as I can. One of the questions is around, is the industry specifically looking at specific indications for virtual trials post-COVID where they could do most good in the fastest amount of time, such as rare disease? I would leave it to you all. Raise a hand. Who would like to tackle that one? Michelle, I saw your hand go up.
Okay, cool. I mean, I think the trend that we're seeing is one which is, you know, how do we facilitate clinical trials to move forward in this era? But definitely when you look at, you know, full decentralization, there is deep interest now in pathways to accelerate clinical trials more generally, I think using decentralized. And we certainly see that, you know, due to trials being on hold or areas that were hard to recruit during this time, rare disease is one area that is kind of looking for more disruption and more disruptive methodologies. So I think, you know, it's about, one, how do we ensure that we can continue the current trials, probably more of a broad utilization of telemedicine across all indications, I think. And then secondarily, you know, with what we have going on, what can we implement now that's going to facilitate faster studies and greater decentralization in general? I think there's a bit of a therapeutic area angle to what's being utilized, but I'd say telemedicine is much more broadly being applied.
Excellent, Michelle. And I think we can get a couple of you involved in this next question, which I think is really interesting. So will participants be less likely to take part in clinical trials of any kind if the trial incorporates more visits from home? And we've just talked a little bit about that. But what's going to happen to that patient-medical professional relationship? Will it suffer or will it prosper if more trials decide to have more virtual interactions? So I think that's a great question for this group. Greg, did you raise your hand? And then Bonnie, and then John, and then Don.
So the answer to whether patients will participate more if there are more visits from home starts by asking patients. I don't have breast cancer, I don't have sickle cell, I don't have a child with Duchenne's. You can ask my opinion on what I think, but the right way to begin is by talking to patients to understand if this is going to be right for them and ensuring you have diverse and representative patients to understand how those differences may vary. In terms of the relationship with providers, my bias tends to be that if deploying a third-party visiting nurse into the home, that doesn't mean we should be leaving the investigator behind. And to me, best practices are to leverage video to continue to include that investigator as a part of that visit so that they can still feel engaged, not marginalized, and fulfill their obligations around patient safety and accountability.
Excellent. John, you raised your hand. You're on mute, John. There you go.
Yeah, I'm just not quick enough. Yeah, I agree with Craig's point. And I think this is why I tend to use the term hybrid trials, because I think what we'll see post-COVID in the new normal is much more in the way of these types of hybrid trials. And I agree with Craig's point about you really need to engage the patient, particularly around what the characteristics are of their disease and their burden at home and what they're dealing with at home. But I think what we're seeing right now with approaches we're all taking in various ways with trying to support decentralized trials is, it's not a one size fits all by any stretch of the imagination. It's a much more customized approach, and particularly around, the disease demographics. But you have to keep some principal investigator engagement. And in fact, a lot of the technologies actually embrace that in using telemedicine and video. So I think you have to do that in that type of model.
Excellent, John. Bonnie?
I agree with both what Craig and John have said, but want to start from a slightly different place. One of the major benefits that study participants have talked about for decades is the faster, greater, longer, more continuous access to medical professionals who are very knowledgeable about their disease or therapeutic need. And so the question is, that's important to continue. How we continue it is very much tied to the different patient populations, even a particular family. But I do believe we've all learned, and this panel is evidence of it, that continuing and investing in our relationships through remote technologies we've become very good at it. And all the people I know, both personally, professionally, study participants, who have an opportunity to supplement their visits with telehealth have been very supportive and really appreciate that. They believe they're getting more and better attention.
Excellent. Don, I think you had raised your hand as well.
I did, Taryn, and thank you. There isn't one model that's going to fit. Therapeutic area by therapeutic area is going to change. If it's a monoclonal antibody, that is infusion, how that works, with whom the patient meets either at home or home service, all of these factors are going to organize themselves. I think the operative concept, though, is one can't get to this area, this period of telemedicine, and break the walls between clinical care and clinical research as dramatically as we have, and not think that patients aren't going to find 10 minutes on a telephone of intense attention by an investigator superior than driving 1 hour, sitting in a room for another 1 hour, and having 3 minutes with the investigator, most of the time with the coordinator. So one has to look at that whole experience and just ask, from the patient's view, what leads to greater empathy, what leads to greater understanding and content. Therapeutic area by therapeutic area. In some cases, there won't be a choice if there's some advanced imaging that's required.
Excellent. Mark, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, Taryn, the one other thing I would say about telemedicine, right, is when we think about therapies like CAR T therapy today, where we think about one treatment and done, one of our biggest challenges, right, is that we need to follow these patients for 10, 15 years. And this is actually where telemedicine, this is where, when I was talking earlier about how technology can help us with our goal, technology can really help us. This is where telemedicine is perfect, right? To allow us to have that easy access to the patient for long-term follow-up. And I think that's the type of place where technology can help. I think that's where telemedicine is perfect. So I think we have to continue to look at how do we tailor the virtualization of studies to the problems that we face, versus try to force fit virtual trials to fit everything. And I think that's what we heard on the panel. But CAR-T for me is a perfect example of where telemedicine is just great for long-term patient follow-up.
Excellent. Did I miss anybody who raised their hand for this question? If not, we are over our time, so I want to be respectful for the time that you have given us, and we're very grateful for your time, as well as to the time our audience has afforded us. Dan, take us home.
Thanks, Darren. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed this new event format and have taken away some insights, and hopefully we stimulated some brainstorming. This was a lot of fun. If you wish to review the event, or if any of your colleagues missed this, once again, it will be available as an archive in about a day, and you'll be notified via email with a link to that. I'd like to once again thank our panelists for sharing their insights with us. And of course, thanks to our great audience for participating in our polls, chat, and the Q&A. I encourage you to look for our on-demand and upcoming web seminars and virtual panels by visiting pharmavoice.com. We've always got some great ones coming up. Thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of your day. The event is now over.